Welcome to the Magical Salon, where two regular people, Amanda and James, explore mystical ideas and big questions. From books to pop culture, if it's a doorway to something deeper, we're probably into it. We're not experts, and maybe you aren't either, but that's kind of the point. We're back with another episode of the Magical Salon. I'm Amanda, your collector of spare parts, and I'm joined by...
your monster, James.
Today we're diving into Frankenstein, the book, the 2025 Guillermo del Toro movie, and the story's enduring legacy. Deeply rooted in and inspired by the occult, Frankenstein has much to offer us about creation, the ethics of science and creation, and the importance of thinking about these questions. So a bit of brief backstory. In a nutshell, Mary Shelley wrote Frankenstein in the 1800s at the age of 18. It was inspired by a trip to Germany where she stayed near Frankenstein Castle, which is also the site of some alchemist engaging in experiments. Her husband, also a famous poet, he was also into occult stuff. And lastly and finally, and maybe most importantly, Mary Shelley invented a new genre, science fiction, with the publication of Frankenstein. So my question to you, what is the basic story of Frankenstein, and when did you read it?
So from a basic story, you mean plot? So from the plot layout at a very high level, from what I remember, I read this in high school, actually. Over the summer, it was required reading. And I remember pretty fondly, I would sit outside in my parents' back patio and I would read under this tree. That was nice. And it surprised me because it's a classic. It's old, 1800. I was not excited for reading this, but it ended up being very subversive to what I was expecting. Starting first and foremost with the fact that Frankenstein is not the monster. Frankenstein is the doctor that creates the monster in the book and in the movie. I think that's a big misconception because in Hollywood, you think of the green guy with like a spike going through his head or something, getting zapped by electricity, and then the crazed doctor yelling, "It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!" That's kind of how it's portrayed in the media, and the monster is just some flesh-eating crazed beast. That's from the Hollywood perspective, historically. Growing up, that's how I was presented Frankenstein anyways. The book is a lot different. It's kind of told through letters. Basically, Victor Frankenstein creates this monster, and yeah, chaos ensues basically. He wants to defy life, he wants to create life, defy death, makes this monster, ends up being really regretful and ashamed of creating it, but the monster ends up being probably the most human character in the entire book, funnily enough, in terms of showing remorse, guilt, having actual emotions, wanting to love and just be accepted, kind of about loneliness in some ways. And yeah, they kind of chase each other around. Victor does to hunt down the monster. The monster is angry, kills all of his family, and they die in the end. And that's a very high level story of how that happens.
Spoiler. I'm kidding. I don't know if does the creature die?
Not exactly, but it's heavily implied he intends to kill him. Like, he will go and burn Victor's corpse and then die, or he wishes to die. He wishes for death, I think, at the end. So it's implied he's gonna just retreat.
Well, and it's interesting because in the Guillermo del Toro movie, and I don't remember because it's been a while, I also read Frankenstein in high school, and it's actually a pretty short book in terms of classics, and that also kind of helped me get through it. And like you've been saying, like there's a lot of meat to it and a lot of thought-provoking things in such a small page count, I would say. But like, I don't really remember this as being part of the book, but I'm sure it is, where like in the movie, like he couldn't die. Like, is that part of the book? Because I feel like that's a fascinating thing because it's just about the nature of suffering.
Yeah, I believe that's canon to the book from my recollection as well. The creature is kind of indestructible. So he creates life from the dead, and then it's kind of a zombie thing where you can shoot him, stab him, do all this stuff. The monster continues to live. One more thing about the origin of the story. So you mentioned how Shelley wrote it as part of this contest that they had one night about writing the scariest story they could think of. And then that's when Frankenstein, this exact story, was written, which is just amazing to me that somebody wrote this essentially in an evening as part of a friendly story competition. That's a fun crowd that would be good for us to hang out with those kind of people.
Yeah, well, I was actually learning like about Mary Shelley. Her mom was Mary Wollstonecraft, who is like was a famous writer and like one of the early like feminist writers, I think. Like she was writing some feminist treatise in the late 1700s. And her dad was also a writer. So like she clearly grew up surrounded by this. But anyway, so back to creature is called the creature in the book, but I think it is also safe to say that Frankenstein is the monster. Victor Frankenstein is the monster, right? So like it's kind of like a play on that. It's interesting also because Victor he represents sort of like an archetype that sits somewhere between the scientist and the alchemist, because he actually like mentions like alchemy related things in the book and whatnot. But then I was also kind of thinking about, because you mentioned how they're like chasing each other around or whatever, like in the movie and in the book. I don't know, it's just like the scientist and his creation, God and his man chasing one another for eternity. Yeah. It's a cool visual and concept.
I agree. And I think the funny thing about the story, I guess, to just back up. So the story, Mary Shelley's story, and they actually mention this in the movie as well, is called Frankenstein, the Modern Prometheus. And that has a lot just packed in the name itself, which you kind of mentioned how the book kind of raises a lot of ethical and moral quandaries about what is life? Should you be creating it like this? Can man create life? Are you becoming God? The whole mythos or mythology of Prometheus, that story, is essentially Prometheus stole fire from the gods and brought it down to earth to mankind. And because of that, he was punished because he quite literally stole from the gods. So then they chain him up to a rock, and then every day a bird comes and eats out his intestines. And then he's reborn every day. And then he just suffers again and again for eternity as punishment for doing what he did. Victor, in the book and movie, is the creator of the monster. He has stolen the fire of life and given it to an inanimate, reassembled concoction of parts, essentially. And I think that the story, that story itself, and just kind of the idea, especially nowadays with gene experiments, editing DNA, or test tube baby, like you're kind of getting into this gray area that this is an old story written as somewhat of a sci-fi almost, because of this death-defying element that's being introduced as possibility in this reality of the book. But our real life is now approaching, to some extent, some of this. And it does seem like defying death and extending life in some ways is the human goal throughout history. That's always something people are preoccupied with. I know there's that one guy that's trying to live forever, and he does all this weird stuff and testing, has a really regimented diet, eats really specific stuff, exercises, does all these weird injections and medications because he's trying to reverse death. And I don't know if you've seen that guy.
I have not. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like with the Prometheus thing, stealing the fire from the gods. It's what we've talked about before on the podcast about playing God, but it's also like the consequences of forbidden knowledge. Humans are not supposed to do certain things, such as create life from death, for example, or like raising the dead, that kind of thing. It's sort of, I don't know, you're kind of stretching beyond where you're meant to be going, and therefore there are negative consequences. And so that's also why Victor Frankenstein, he shirks the creature in part because he cannot and will not accept responsibility for his own actions. He views the creature as like this scourge upon society, and he feels guilt for having unleashed it. But at the same time, I don't know that he really, like, he's not taking accountability at the end of the day. He's more so saying maybe there's regret about the creation aspect, but there's still a lack of accountability for I did this thing and I should not have done it. Ultimately, I am responsible for whatever the creature does because I am its creator.
That is interesting. And it kind of, you mentioned the god chasing man and man chasing the god. It's kind of, again, the Ouroboros, the snake. You're circling back. So who created the chicken or the egg? These eternal questions that are kind of paradoxical. They're silly and dumb. But then the more you think about it, it is like, I'm not sure, actually. It's hard to say. And in this specific story, you mentioned how reaching for knowledge and getting it, not only is it necessarily forbidden, or it's supposed to be for the gods or whatever, a higher than human entity is in charge of these powers or this ability. So if you as a human are able to reach to these heights or access this level of consciousness or magic, there's risks, A, and B, almost unmitigatable symptoms or consequences from that happening. Basically, once you go so far, you cannot come back. You can't hit the undo button at a certain point of, oh, I did this ritual and summoned this thing, put it back in the box. No, you did that ritual, you summoned that thing. There is no box. That's in the reality now. You've introduced that. You are the creator. It's out of the cat's out of the bag. You can't put it back in the box, basically.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I would say Frankenstein, like all great literature, is about the human experience, and it's about human suffering. At the end of the day, there's all these other things going on, but it's about suffering. Just think about how much Victor suffers because he's created this thing that he regrets, and then obviously the creature's suffering because everyone hates the creature, but he just wants to be loved. He can't escape how others see him. And in many ways, he becomes the monster because that's all anyone will ever see him as. And so in that way, it kind of reminds me of Elphaba from Wicked, because people will only ever see her as evil, or they'll create someone else evil to have someone to vilify, to have a villain so that they can be good. You know what I mean? So there's no point in like clearing her name at the end of Wicked. So there's kind of like a parallel there. But that's ultimately, even though that's the case, there's still such suffering for both of those characters.
I would say it's definitely the idea of it being about the human experience, or it is great literature, first of all, but love is also an element that I think is kind of in some ways omitted from the movie that I can remember. But the book, again, it's kind of an inversion of your expectation. So the creature you expect to be the hateful killing machine, and the human you expect to be the loving whatever. But in reality, Victor is kind of the villain. If there's not really a villain protag. It's kind of a gray area, the whole story, truthfully. But Victor has a lot of love in the book that he talks about in the beginning. He's like loves his sister. He loves his parents. He's kind of showing love to people in his life, but rejecting it for his obsession with science and running to do this experiment and create life. So he basically has real love and throws it away for his science. Contrast it with the creature who's manufactured. Nobody loves him. Everybody hates him. He's abhorrent to look at in the books, which we should talk about because it's funny. Because in the movie, what's that guy's name?
Jacob Elordi.
Okay, so this guy's like a hot Hollywood heartthrob kind of. So in the books, the creature's hated. Everybody's horrified when they see him. The movie has a very hot, hip, fit dude playing the monster.
Okay, but he doesn't look hot or fit. It looks like he's like 12 feet tall in the movie. He looks super tall, and he has like really oily, stringy, gross hair. But then, like, other than that, it doesn't really look like what you would imagine when you imagine Frankenstein. But I think that's a good thing, because I think it's just, I don't know. I think Guillermo del Toro did a good job of capturing just that gothic vibe, including just like the incredible visuals, the drama, the suspense, the ambiance. Like, he nailed it. Like, I think he really did capture the spirit of Frankenstein. But also, yeah, Jacob Elordi hot, but not so hot in this movie, I've got to say.
The point being, the irony is what I was getting at, because it's the creature. So in the book, the creature, everybody hates him. He wants love more than anything and cannot get it. And I just thought that was an interesting, because it's kind of the human experience. You're always like, the grass is always greener. You're looking outside. And at one point in the book, and this definitely is not, I don't think this, maybe in the book they build up to it better. I'll definitely say that. But the monster comes and pleads to Victor, like, I will leave you alone. Just give me a companion. I have nothing. Like, I'm just alone. Everybody hates me. And I thought, it's just sad, right? It's heartbreaking.
It is. Well, yeah. I mean, it goes back to the classic question. What is evil? Do you start evil, or do you become evil because of what happens to you? And Frankenstein basically says, well, you become evil because of the way that others treat you and the trauma that you endure throughout your life. And you talked about Victor Frankenstein, how he had so much love surrounding him, which is true. But also, he could have loved the creature, right? He could have had a different relationship with the creature. He could have been open to getting to know the creature, because the creature learned everything from being ostracized and like hiding and observing other people and that type of thing. So he could have taken a totally different approach. And I also think it's interesting how he won't create a companion. Specifically, the creature wants a female companion because it wants love and happiness. But Victor Frankenstein's like, no, because I don't want them to reproduce, which is crazy.
The creature is more human than the humans is what we're getting at, basically. But the idea of a scorned child in some ways is almost what it's getting at from a human element, because it's all very metaphorical. Like, you could almost argue it's like abusive parents that just have the kid and then chuck him to the curb in some ways, which is essentially what Victor's like. He creates life and then is like, oops, I don't want to actually deal with the consequences of my action. I'm just going to throw this thing out on the street, aka the monster. That is what happens. Because to your point, there's an alternate story where he raises the creature and their buddies or whatever, because the creature is intelligent. It has emotion. It's not a cyborg robot killing machine. It's an organic life. It's not human, but he created life, a conscious sentient being, which is now kind of getting into AI to the modern era.
Yes, because that's what I was also thinking. So firstly, I would say, if you think about it in like Jungian terms or archetypes or whatever, in some ways you could say part of why Victor Frankenstein is suffering to such an extent is because he's experiencing the spiritual cost of abandoning his own creation, which obviously there's a lot to work through in terms of that. But regards to AI, I was also thinking about this, and I've seen other people talk about the connection between Frankenstein and AI on TikTok specifically because of the new movie. But I would say, as it currently stands, AI is not sentient, but it is definitely skewing that direction. So the question becomes, have we or will we create something sentient with AI? And if so, how are we going to treat that, right? Is it not just going to be us being Victor Frankenstein and taking all rights and kindness away from sentient AI? Like, I don't know. I mean, it's because we created this, right? We are Victor Frankenstein in this scenario. Are we going to spurn our creation, or are we going to like take it under our wing?
That's a great and profound question. Again, it's very relevant. This is very old, over 150 years old at this point. Who knows? And it's completely relevant. And don't forget, in the story, he cannot kill the monster still. The monster outlives the creator. The monster also kills all of the creator Victor's loved ones and family because he's so annoyed with how badly he was mistreated. So take of humans, all of these stories are about hubris. They think they know better, and humans are going to, just like everything else, we will create AI or something. It will be too powerful at some point. Instead of trying to, at that point, you'd have to reason with it. Or if you had been treating it right the entire time, aka Frankenstein, if he just raised and helped create the light, he created life. If he helped raise the life that he created and growing with it and kind of in harmony or whatever, balance, AI, you could have evolved alongside it. Maybe that's a better word. He could have evolved with Frankenstein. We could evolve with AI, or it could just blow us out of the water, which it will do eventually, basically.
Yes, I mean, I think that's sort of a longer term story, but yeah, I think that's the only way that it can go, because honestly, I think that part of the thing with AI is because it's sort of slow changes over time, it's not AI becoming sentient overnight, which is basically what happens in Frankenstein. He creates life and then life wakes up and he knows instantly that it's sentient. And I think that's partly why he regrets it in such a capacity, because it's not just, oh, I created, something maybe with the intelligence level of like a wolf. Now it's like, okay, this is as smart as me. But I think it'll be difficult for people to treat AI as anything worthy of compassion, because now, like the way that people use ChatGPT and how they curse at Siri and that type of thing, it's a slow evolution. But I think ultimately people don't perceive AI as anything worthy of respect.
Agree. And it's really what you're doing with the AI to Frankenstein scenario. It's going from theoretical to real. And Victor Frankenstein, has that oh shit moment when he realizes it's conscious And I can't undo this. I'm in trouble. What did I do? Basically, applying that to AI, to your point, people don't give a crap. I don't give a crap about it, or computers, which is probably bad. But we humans like AI now because it's the theoretical version where it's basically human slave. I don't know if that's the right word, but we have AI to outsource all of these jobs, do everything for me. It just works, doesn't complain, and it's super efficient and smarter than us. That's all well and good when it can't think, which is what we say, and we think we are the controllers of it. Frankenstein thinks he will control his creation until he has it, and then, it's as smart as me or smarter, and I can't kill it. And that's what AI will be, basically. Right now, humans don't fear AI or care about it because we view it as less than, not equal to, or better than humans. We don't even consider those two as possibilities. Yeah, you're at the top of the food chain, basically. But what if humans make an extra rung that we can't get to? That's kind of Frankenstein in some way. You create something better than you, and it doesn't like you because you treated it bad.
I mean, well, going back to what I said before, like people don't respect AI, but people don't really respect a lot of things, including other humans. But also just think about how much animal abuse there is. Like there's definitely a tier of, how much compassion should I have towards this thing? And animals typically fall very low on that.
So I have a quick question. Life, where do you start thinking something's alive? A plant, an ant?
Well, it's funny that you say that because this is going to sound ridiculous and I understand that. But when people are like, I'm going vegan because I don't want to eat anything living or I don't want to hurt these animals, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. That's valid. But then are you also thinking about the fact that you're eating plants, which obviously, but even if you're trying to draw a distinction there, that's you creating a hierarchy that does not exist. So really it's about, I think, acknowledging exactly what you're taking and why you need to take it and taking no more than you need to, which people cannot ever do, which gets back to Frankenstein doing something that you're not really meant to be doing. But I also think like in terms of Frankenstein, the fear is because he has no control over his creation. It all goes back to control. If I can't control it, that's with AI too. It's like, I want a computer that's super advanced that can do a bunch of things. It can just labor all day long and I don't have to pay it. It has no rights. That's exactly what they're trying to create. That's what they want. But then when it becomes something that's no longer controllable, then obviously, I'm fearful or whatever, but it's like, it's my creation.
Then you get Terminator. But also think about, the idea of life being valued on a hierarchy, I like that idea, specifically regarding Frankenstein. But people treat, from a vegan, vegetarian, non-meat eating perspective, you're right, they're still eating something that's alive. They're saying that an animal life is more valuable. I would rather eat plants because I don't consider plant life as important as animal life. It's life, ultimately, if you acknowledge it. That's the point, though. They draw the line at what is alive at a different level. It used to be your heart has to be beating. Then it was your brain has to be dead. You need to be brain dead. If you're in a coma, are you dead or are you alive? Like, you can grade people's, because people would get buried because they were in a coma. They didn't know better. And then they would wake up. So they started installing ropes that they would put in the So, and then there was a bell tied at the top. So theoretically, if you woke up and had been buried alive because you were in a coma or something, because you were really sick and almost dead, they would bury you thinking you were dead. Anyways, but the idea of controlling it, I think, is just funny because you're drawing a line in the sand at what is life. That's a form of control too. You could consider a rock as alive, technically. AI, computers.
Well, a rock, though, you could claim it's alive, but it doesn't, like a plant grows. Amoebas move around. If something alive, like that just goes back to the nature of consciousness. So I guess what I'm saying, it's maybe more like it's a hierarchy of consciousness. Like, what consciousness do we value the most? Oh, you're a lobster. We don't value your consciousness that much. But what if they have just as an elaborate of a life as we're living in our heads and in our social circles and whatever? And it goes back to like Horton Hears a Who when they're like holding up and it's their entire world, but he can hold it at the tip of his two fingers.
about life. Electricity is important in life, about humans' view of life over time, like brain activity. But brain activity is electrical. In Frankenstein, he uses electricity and batteries to electrocute life into a corpse. So electricity, we know it actually, you could almost say, if you viewed the universe as the force or chi or prana, these ideas of a life force pervading everything, everything is technically vibrating, which gets trippy when you start thinking about it. I agree a plant grows and a rock just sits there as a rock, but the rock is very solid and think of everything in the world. A wind blows a plant over. A dog can eat the plant and then it's gone and dead. But the rock is very sturdy. So there's a lot of consciousness, you could argue, holding those particles together instead of just falling apart like a plant. It's much easier to crumble than maintain a very hard shape like diamond over time. That's like millions of years it has been in that structure, basically. And it's very difficult to break. So you could argue there's intelligence there. That's how the people say rocks and crystals. It grows in a certain pattern and holds the shape. There's something making it different than the other stuff around it. It's vibrating at a very specific... In some ways, the idea of being very one-pointed, very focused, as being able to be a benefit in magic, your mental power, your mental focus. In fact, in Dune and the techno priests and stuff that I've been reading, they have a big element of being able to use mind waves to like and psychically blast people with stuff. I don't know. It's kind of interesting to think if you're being able, electricity could be that though. If Frankenstein uses electricity, that could be the magic of the real world, but we just don't fully understand how to harvest it yet. It does beat your heart.
Well, no, I mean, like, I was actually looking it up. Well, because when you were saying like, oh, like the body is electrical, which is weird to think about, and it doesn't really make sense. So to your point, maybe it's because if you think about when they do like the Hadron Collider and they have those particles like whirring super fast and they're just like moving around on their own and stuff, and you're like, why are they doing that?
In some ways, this is where the magic happens. We're veering into the unknown. Do people know? Think about the magic of electricity. Okay, so I was asking engineers about this, that I know, electrical engineers, about electricity, because I was reading this book called The Invisible Rainbow, and it's talking about how there's an entire spectrum of frequencies to make stuff digital and wireless, like Wi-Fi, radio waves, TV antennas, 5G towers, not to sound like crazy now, but those do emit and broadcast signals. They're passing through me right now. Like that radiator running is blasting particles at me right now. I know electricity and my nervous system is electrical. And you have a lot of, I don't know, you could argue that this stuff is impacting you negatively, that we just take for granted because we created it and it can't hurt us. We know better until, oops, you created something that you shouldn't have, like Prometheus, like Frankenstein, to wrap it all the way back. Oh,
I was going to talk about how when we went to that spirit fair and they had like this kiosk there, and it was this lady with all these like glass blown charms which were attached to thread of some kind. So there were necklaces and earrings, bracelets, etc. But the whole shtick behind it was they were like, I don't know, like techno bracelets or something. They were supposed to like stop the rays from your phone. And they demonstrated it to us by like you put both of your arms straight out to your sides, like you'd raise them up, and then she would like, I don't know, like try and push your right arm down, and you'd be like, okay, yeah, that's pretty easy. And then she'd be like, okay, hold your phone with your other hand, and then she would try and push your right arm down again, and then it would like fall to the floor. And then you'd be like, what the heck? And she's like, yeah, those are the bad rays coming from your phone. And you know what? Try this bracelet in your hand, then try it again. And of course it works perfectly. And it might just be an amazing sales pitch, but at the end, because I don't really know that I believe that little crystal can block it. But the point is that there's things piercing through your body that have no right to be piercing through there.
well, it's called EMF radiation. And yeah, it's the idea, the experiment, you could call it, the little sales pitch spiel, is it's the muscle testing. That's what David Hawkins talks about in the beginning of the map of consciousness when he's like, I rated their consciousness level through muscle testing. That's what he's describing. He's interviewing people and asking them questions while pushing their arm up or down because you can't push back whatever. If you don't believe it, something, then your body naturally, it's like a subconscious thing getting into Jung. That's what the muscle testing is. So she's like, you're going to feel weak because you have a phone and I'm talking about it. Then I give you this and you're like, yeah, I could definitely hold it, obviously. Or even, oh, there's no way this will work, but you're kind of thinking about it now.
So it is just a shtick.
I don't know if it's a shtick necessarily. Again, it goes to belief in magic. If you believe in the spell, in some ways it has a better chance of working. It's the whole idea of placebo or doing this tea or I wear this lucky bracelet. People say prayers and guess what? They do get better. So I don't know. Does that mean prayer is real or is it self-belief? Because then it's like, oh yeah, this person does their ritual every day. They throw an egg at the wall and they're the best player in the league. It's bizarre. Nobody understands it, but that's why. That's the magic of the real world, basically. Belief.
Okay, I think we should start to wrap up. It's interesting because Frankenstein has had such a culturally large impact, kind of how, like I mentioned Wicked earlier in the episode, and we were talking about it before. The Wizard of Oz has had a really big impact. Even now, we're still talking about The Wizard of Oz, which came out in 1939. That's a very long time ago to be that culturally relevant still.
It's cool because, yeah, my mom was even, I mentioned that we had watched The Wizard of Oz and she knew, she was telling me all the songs. It's just, there's something timeless about it. And it's interesting to watch because as we were remarking, like Frankenstein, it's just kind of a tale of people going on this thing. So Frankenstein is like man creating something, hubris, downfall. That's the story of it ultimately. Kind of like going back to, what is it, Roman tragedies or whatever. There's a specific outline. It has to do a certain thing, but that's the genre. It's the idea.
Yeah, I can't remember what it is. It's something like everything's a tragedy, a comedy, or a tragic comedy or something like that. I don't know. I'm probably making that up. Going back to what I was actually going to say about, so Frankenstein is a timeless thing, or at least it's been relevant for a really long time because there's a lot to like about it, honestly. And it is sort of a horror at the end of the day. There's kind of that element to it that it unsettles them. Anyway, so there's a clear connection in pop culture between Frankenstein and camp, which is like an aesthetic. I don't know if you're super familiar with camp.
No, what is camp? Wait, what?
You don't know what camp is?
Frankenstein is considered camp?
No, I'm saying that, well, I'll get to it, but Frankenstein has become relevant in a camp sense. Like just, so earlier in the episode, you mentioned the classic image of Frankenstein being like green with the bowl. So camp is like over the top, exaggerated, artificial, flamboyant. So there's a connection between camp and like the queer community, for example. And another Frankenstein reference, Rocky Horror Picture Show, is also a classic example of camp. It's so over the top and that it's almost so bad that it's good is kind of like part of it. And Susan Sontag, whose book I read recently, I read her book on photography, but she also has an essay called On Camp where she's kind of credited with bringing camp into the mainstream consciousness. I also feel like in a lot of ways it makes sense that Frankenstein and camp are such a good pair, in part because Gothic, I feel, was like the precursor to camp, because Gothic is like super over the top. I mean, just think about like the color palette that Guillermo del Toro used and all the mountain shots that you always noticed and mentioned. And you're like, wow, that's so like super beautiful. Like the actual visuals were very nice. And the costumes were really good too.
It did have a good element. I like it. Yeah, thinking of it from a movie perspective now to kind of blend the two. This is our Frankenstein episode. We're mishmashing the two book and movie together to create this, plus us, the third element. Do we have a weekly wisdom?
We sure do. It's from the one and only Mary Shelley. Guess who said this? Which character? I have love in me, the likes of which you can scarcely imagine, and rage, the likes of which you would not believe. If I cannot satisfy the one, I will indulge the other.
Oh, it's very threatening. I would imagine that it would be the creature, but I know it's actually from Frankenstein.
No, it's the creature.
The creature?
Yeah, so basically he's talking about the human experience. When you're born into being a person, you, like, when you're a kid, I think you are ultimately just like a ball of joy and light. Like, because kids are always like so happy. But then, like, if they become traumatized, then, you know, it's about how the world has made him into a monster. Not that he was born as one. He wanted to be loved like anyone else does. But people were just afraid of him and mistreated him, and they enacted violence on him. And he was like, my only choice is to respond with violence, basically. So that's really what the quote is. All right. So, yeah, go watch the movie, go read the book, go be nice to AI. See you next week on the Magical Salon.